So this is the COBIT, which stands for Center of Balance Indicating Tool. And we use it, put it on the horse's foot to find the center of balance, and then we've developed a method of trimming and chewing off that center of balance. Kind of where it all started, I had a client of mine had a horse that was having all kinds of lameness problems, back problems, navicular tendons, kissing spines. Just they were going to put this horse down after about $20,000 worth of vet work. He's a really nice horse, and I convinced the lady that owned him not to put him down. And she said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I have no idea. You got to give me a couple of weeks to think about it." So I got working with my vet at home, and we x-rayed, and from the outside of what we're taught with horseshoeing, the horse didn't appear to really have much distortion. There was no apparent flare or whatever, but this horse was greatly distorted right from the cornet band, and x-rays showed me where the coffin bone was versus where the foot was, and I was like, well, that can't be right. So anyhow, according to where I figured breakover is, and we'll get into that later where I set breakover, and lots of other farriers do, I needed to go over an inch behind the white line to get to that point. And everything we're taught as horseshoers says you can't do that. But they've dug a hole and there's someone waiting with a gun and this horse is going in it, so I got nothing to lose. So I start trimming on this horse's foot, and I go back an inch and a quarter behind the white line, just trimming a little bit, checking it. And everyone didn't even want to watch, and the vet that was there told me I was crazy. But anyhow, we went back to there. The horse, no blood, no soft, no worse than he was. So we continued to do that. And long story short, 2 years later, this horse won national title at the Red Deer at the Canadian National Quarter Horse Show. But I figured, well, I can't x-ray every time. I need some place to measure from. And I'd learned that the landmarks that we look on the outside of the foot can greatly distort in all kinds of directions and be very misleading. So there was a time when I would just measure from the heel bulbs forward. That was pretty good, but it wasn't as accurate as I maybe wanted. So I was aware of center of balance in a horse's foot. Some other people had talked about it and stuff, and we used to take a broom handle and stick it on their foot and duct tape it on there and kind of see if we could find that balance point, and it was not very accurate, but kind of. So I made this primitive tool that I could attach to poor Henry's foot, and I actually found a spot where he would balance, teeter back and forth. And so with x-rays, I measured from there to the tip of his coffin bone, and then that way each time I trimmed him, I could find that balance point, and I trimmed him to those measurements. And then that's how he continued to get better. And so we started doing this on other horses. Peak Veterinary out of Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan has been with me since the start of this whole thing. We have taken hundreds of x-rays over the last 10 years. They give me access to the clinic, the veterinarian when I need it to do research. None of this would be possible without their backing and help and whatever, and we still do research. But anyhow, a lame horse would come to the clinic, we'd x-ray and we'd figure out these measurements. And then after about a year or so of doing this, Dr. Goslin says to me, "Do you notice that distance is relatively the same when for all horses with relatively the same size of foot?" If you follow me there, like a bigger foot, the distance was bigger, but it was the same amount bigger and so we'll just say a horse that would wear an aught shoe. The distance from center of balance to the tip of the coffin bone only varied just 2 or 3 millimeters, maybe either way, between one horse and the next. So we kind of started thinking, well, maybe now we don't have to x-ray every horse before we start. So that allowed me to use the COBIT in the field just to find center of balance, and I'd just get my ruler out and measure it, and we would go. But so over the years, we built COBITs that work better and a little more user-friendly, and the one that we have now actually has slots built in it, so you don't have to get your ruler out and make all these measurements and stuff. And so what we're trying to do is trim the foot so there's equal amounts of foot in the front and the rear of center of balance so the leg is loaded evenly. So we'll get into that in more detail as we go. Here's some pictures of an English rider, the barrel racer. If any of you barrel race, you've ever heard of Rusty Quam. So I didn't even realize it, but I've been building towards this COBIT thing for over 25 years. And it actually started with Rusty back in about 1999. And she had these two horses that had horribly run out feet, but they were talented and could really run barrels. And I tried wedge pads, and I was bringing the toe back quite a bit, and rocker and toes and bar shoes. And we tried all that stuff, and we were having success, but not as much as we wanted. So I said to Rusty, I said, I want to set the horse's shoe back, and we're just going to leave his foot hang over the front of the shoe. But I'm going to set the shoe back. I think it went back nearly half an inch. And she's like, okay, let's try it. So we did. Horses run really well. She made the Final Four at Calgary and won the average at the CFR with half an inch of foot hanging over the front of her shoe. Now, if any of you know Rusty Quam, she's not into drama. So people would say to her, they'd look at her horse and they'd say, who does your horseshoeing? And she'd just say, I do my own. And then they wouldn't bother her anymore and they'd just leave her. She'd go take their money and off she went. So we moved down the line. We have a dressage horse. We have a working cow horse rider, and that's Dale Clearwater. And he's one of the Canada's winningest performers in the working cow horse world. And either myself or like Logan or my other helpers, we've shot every horse that Dale Clearwater's ever won anything with. And so I've been going there 22 years. And so he was in on this build up too as we worked ahead. And so we were able to try it on some horses that perform at a pretty high caliber. Kent Drake on the heel horse there, he actually apprenticed with me over 20 years ago. He was one of the very first people to use a COBIT other than myself. And then we have a calf roper, and that's Logan Larson. He's the guy back here running the camera. And Logan's been working with me for 5-6 years now, something like that. The reason I got to all those different pictures there is to show that it works on horses of all disciplines and breeds. And the reason for that is when we're shoeing a horse or trimming a horse, we should be shoeing to the horse's skeleton. And we shouldn't be trimming him a certain way because he's a barrel horse and trimming him a different way because he's a jumping horse and he's a warm blood and he's a whatever. Because if you go and if you just want to take a look at a skeleton of a horse, you go in a book or Google or whatever you do, there's just a picture of a skeleton comes up. And it doesn't say quarter horse, and it doesn't say warm blood, and it doesn't say Shetland pony, it's just a skeleton. Because the skeleton of all horses is the same. Yeah, some are taller, and some got a little different angle, and a little different length of cannon bone, those sorts of things. But it's not like a quarter horse has one more leg bone than Clydesdale does or whatever. So when we're shoeing a horse, we should be shoeing to we should be shoeing to the horse's skeleton. If we do that, it doesn't matter what discipline he's in. So we should trim all our horses the same and then shoe them according to their discipline. So a reining horse needs he needs a slippery shoe, and a jumping horse needs some corks when he's on grass, and a barrel horse, we put rims on him so he's got some traction in the dirt. But the way we actually balance the horse shouldn't change from one discipline to the other. And so that's just a little bit of just generalizing how we should shoe horses. So we have a picture here of a horse standing on the COBIT, and he's balancing on it. And where is the COBIT? Thank you. So we, when the horse stands in there, as long as he can be a little here, a little there, but as long as he's kind of doing this, then we found the balance point. So this is actually a video of a horse standing on it. And there's not a lot of movement, but you'll see there's a little bit. And he's slightly lower in the toe than the heel, and we'll talk about the importance of that here just a little later on. But if you get a horse doing this, then you've got it in the wrong spot. So if he tips forward, you have the balance point on the COBIT behind the center of balance. Loosen the screw off, move the COBIT forward. So if it tips forward, move it forward. If the COBIT tips back, loosen the screw off, and move it back. So there's a picture of one tip back, but this is the ideal what we want there of balance, and the other leg is picked up at that point. Okay, so I don't get real hung up on the anatomy. There's a picture here, and I think, you know, probably a lot of you are somewhat familiar with anatomy. This is an old leg an old farrier friend of mine gave me, and so we'll just talk about the couple most important ones. So we have the pink one down the front, or the rear, sorry, and that's our deep flexor tendon. The black one is our superficial flexor. On the front, we have the extensor tendon, and then we have our suspensory ligaments that kind of help support the fetlock. So yes, there's way more ligaments involved here and there, and we could go down this rabbit hole for an hour arguing about anatomy. What I want to get across to you is loading the front and the rear of the leg equally. And we'll talk, I'll just mention the bones that we're going to refer to. So there's our cannon bone, long pastern, short pastern, and coffin bone. So you can go, you know, first phalanx, second P1, 2, and 3, and I prefer to just keep it simple where everyone can understand. So the longer bones, your long pastern, short pastern, and coffin bone. And you'll hear me talk, and here's our navicular bone. It's this guy's bone disappeared. He's got a little piece of wood in there. That's his actual navicular bone now, but we'll talk about that a little more as we go along. Different parts of the foot. So, you know, we'll talk about the toe callus, which is, my little pointer doesn't work that good. You know, a lot of times you'll get a little callus built up at the toe. I mean, there's the toe with the hoof wall. We have our outer hoof wall. And then we have the white line, and then we have here we have the water line, and then the white line. And I don't know sure who named them, because the white line is yellow and the water line is white. So I'm not just sure who named them, but it wasn't me. And seat of corn, you'll hear me talk about that, especially when we get to the horse, which is this area right in here where the hoof wall stops at the heel and the bar goes forward. Point of the frog, apex of the frog, whichever term you want to use. The bars. Buttress of the heel is the farthest back weight-bearing surface of the hoof wall at the heel. And then our frog, and we have cleft of frog, central sulci, kind of whatever. There's a few different terms that people use. So now we'll actually get into breakover. What is breakover, and where should it be? So myself and lots of other people in the industry believe that breakover should be a line, if you draw down the front of the coffin bone, to where it intersects with the ground. There has been some new research that's been done in the last few years that they say it should actually be straight down from the tip of the coffin bone is where breakover should be. I put it right here. So if you look at this horse here, he's got quite a bit of distortion. His breakover is way out here. What breakover actually is the point where when the horse is passing over his foot, at the point when the heel starts to lift, this point right here is breakover. That's the point of breakover. So another thing you're going to hear me talk about is Palmar angle. So we used to talk a lot more about angle on the front of the foot, and 55 degrees and 57, and even veterinarians would, on their x-ray machine, they could come up with degrees, and that was measuring the front of the coffin bone. Now we mostly talk about Palmar angle, which is actually the angle of the bottom of the coffin bone versus the ground. And so now you'll hear angles of like 2 degrees, 3, 5, 7, something like that. It's not 50 and 60 and whatever it once was. And so what you want to do is that Palmar angle coffin bone in relationship to the ground is very important, and you'll hear me talk about that as we move along. So we'll go to this x-ray, which is the same as what I have here. I blew this up a little bigger, it's a little bit easier to see. So this was a horse brought to us, was getting the start of navicular, and we were asked to work on this horse. And this horse was 8 years old or something like that. And so you might wonder what's going on here. So this horse had foundered earlier in its life and didn't get taken care of properly. And that Palmar angle got very steep to the point where this is actually a little bone chipped off the tip of the coffin bone. And we'll get into that a little bit more as we move along. But so just don't worry about that little bone chip there. What I want you to look at first is this mark right here, this little white mark. So what I did is actually I took the COBIT and found the center of balance, marked it with my pencil, and then I just cut the head off a horseshoe nail and taped it there so it would show up in the horse's foot. Just so when you look at the x-ray, there's a reference point of how far is it to here and elsewhere. Then if you look in the after x-ray, it's hiding in behind the horseshoe nail here, but that center of balance is right here. So what I want you to look at is where it is in the before and after picture. It doesn't move. Center of balance doesn't move. And it doesn't move from when the horse has long feet and then you trim them up and shorten them up. It doesn't move. And it's in the same spot 6 weeks later and 12 weeks later and whenever. And we come up with that because I have so much access to x-rays. And back to Peak Veterinary, whenever I want to, they'll just x-ray, let me take whatever x-rays I want and look at whatever. And so I'm able to, I probably have more after x-rays of my work than most farriers ever do, because you'll get x-rays before, but not too many people take x-rays afterwards because it costs money, right? And so when I got some brainchild that I'm coming up with, Peak Veterinary, they'll let me take stuff for my own use. Like they charge the customer for, your regular. But if I go off on a tangent and want to do some x-raying, nobody gets charged for that. And that's how I'm able to see so many x-rays after to see, did I get it right? Does this work? Does this not work? Okay, so our center of balance didn't move. So now the next thing I want you to look at is where breakover is. So off the tip of the coffin bone. And if you see where the breakover in the shoe is, so it's way ahead of that point. So then if you look in the after picture, you draw that line down. The breakover that's built into, this is a St. Croix rim shoe, is right where breakover should be. So that was the COBIT showing us where to set breakover, trim the foot first, and then where to set breakover. Next thing I want you to look at is back to the before picture. So we drew a line up from the heel of the shoe and see where it is in relationship to the bone structure. Then in the after x-rays, see how much farther back that line is? So you look at that and you think, oh, well, yeah, he moved the shoe back and then he just put a bigger shoe on so the heel hung out farther. Wrong answer. It's a smaller, one size smaller shoe than it is in this picture. But what happens when you center the weight-bearing surface around the center of balance and get a decent Palmar angle? The horse actually lines his long and short pastern bones up with the coffin bone himself. And just to step back a little bit, you're looking at this picture and you're like, well, that's not equal. There's slightly more here than there is there. So when we were developing the COBIT, we x-rayed lame horses, sound horses, good-footed horses, bad-footed horses, everything we could get in to kind of come up with a common number. And it appeared that good footed horses that are